Hey, welcome to part 2 video of my fully comprehensive rent-to-rent training program. If you haven't seen part 1 video, then I strongly suggest you save this video to your bookmarks, go back to video number 1 because this is where we cover everything from scratch, from the very basics, understanding what rent-to-rent is, how to find rent-to-rent leads, how to go through your business goals, how to find direct-to-landlord leads, how to find letting agents leads, how to really build your script so it's personal to you, but it's also very impacting and very successful and converting. All of those things are covered in the first video. But if you're in this video, then the chances are that you've already covered part 1 video, which is absolutely amazing. And now you're ready for part 2 video. Also, at the end of video number 1, I set a challenge for you, a 30-day challenge that you can enter with a very small fee. And this challenge will give you the tools, the coaching, the mentoring that you need for the next 30 days in order for you so that you can start securing 8 pre-qualified viewings in a single month, every single month. If you don't understand why it's 8 pre-qualified viewings, then it means that you didn't watch the first video. I suggest that you go back and watch the first video. If you do understand what's the power of securing 8 pre-qualified viewings, then you will understand that this blueprint and the whole 30-day challenge will be massively helpful to you to put your next step on your journey. As you know, I hate the garbage training that other people provide with the courses and packages online for you to learn and then you're on your own. I don't want you to be in that position because that's where I was and I know how difficult it was for me to find my first property. Instead, you can surround yourself with the right people, with the right accountability, and with the right knowledge and blueprint so it will be personalized to you and you know exactly what you need to do every day for you to become successful rent-to-rent entrepreneur, and you can put that first step on your journey. Okay, ready to move on with the next module? Brilliant. Let's crack on then.
So video number 2 is mainly dedicated to its HMOs, houses of multiple occupancy. How to find them on a rent-to-rent basis, how to manage them on a rent-to-rent basis. There will be plenty of information going your way. But before we crack on with it, I really want to break down the features of your rent-to-rent business. That is something that you're going to be also incorporating in your scripts. That is something that will become your Bible of your service, because if you understand what are the features of your business and what are the benefits associated with those features, then guess what? They will be so much easier for you to sell, to have conversations, to influence people and impact them in a way so that they really want to buy from you, and you're not pushing them and you're not hardly convincing them that your product is the best on the market or they need to purchase from you although they don't need it. Use the language of features and benefits, and trust me, this will improve your conversion rates massively. So let's focus on those features, and I want you to know them by heart. It's extremely important, and that's something I repeat to my private clients day in, day out. Let's break them down. In the first place, we've got long-term agreement, typically between 2 to 7 years. I know people say typically it should be 3 to 5. Of course, that's okay. But sometimes landlords don't want to step into the first agreement if they just met you and they don't want to sign a 3-year contract with you. Sometimes they can say 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. That's fine. 1 year, in my opinion, is a little bit too short, because in the first year you should be making your return. Your property should be returning your profits at least 2 times ideally. So that property should pay you off multiple times. And in order to make this happen, I think the minimum term for this to happen is 2 years. That's the minimum I would go for. Now, 3 years is great, 5 years is awesome, but I've also seen people signing contracts for 6 or 7 years, and there is nothing wrong with it as long as we can manage this time okay alongside the right break clause in the contract. Next one down, we've got fixed rent. I think every landlord loves the fact that they can get the fixed amount every single month for the duration of the contract. If I was the landlord, or you are the landlord, and you've got this HMO property or service accommodation property, residential, doesn't matter, and somebody comes to you and they say that for the next 5 years they will be paying you every single month, wouldn't that make you feel happy, comfortable, easy? That's where you want to be. And these are the benefits associated with the fixed rent. Next, we've got full management. Of course, we're taking this property and we're going to manage it day in, day out. People normally, in those circumstances, they have to pay for their management services and they have to pay extra for other features like finding tenant, for signing the contract, for setting up deposits. There are fees and fees and fees creeping up. If we provide everything under one umbrella and we're going to be managing this property for them, then guess what? Not only it's a long duration, but also full management is included. Again, that gives them a lot of peace of mind. Next, we've got hands-off maintenance. So I think maintenance is a big pain point for many landlords, especially if they have been on the market for some time. They've experienced some bad tenants or bad breakdowns, etc. And they get to a point where they really want to become hands-off when it comes to maintenance. In that case, we are going to coordinate all the maintenance. We are going to arrange all the breakdowns. We're going to communicate with tenants or guests in order to rectify those problems so they don't have to be involved. For many landlords, this will be a critical selling point. Next, we've got maintenance allowance. Of course, we're looking to take on the maintenance coordination, but on top of that, we're looking to cover some of the minor expenses towards maintenance of the property. And for many landlords, it's great because if there are some minor breakdowns and minor repairs, sometimes it's even taking more time than it's actually worth in terms of the monetary value. So if you can handle those minor repairs and then they don't even have to know about them, then guess what? That's another selling point to many landlords. Next one down, we've got bills paid. Especially over the last few years, we've experienced a huge volatility in bills. COVID happened, then the market started going crazy. We started seeing increases of 100%, 200%. It was absolutely mental, right? So we get to a point where if we suggest somebody that we're going to be covering all the bills during the duration of 3-year or 4-year or 5-year contract, then guess what? We're taking away a lot of volatility for this landlord. And for that reason, especially if they had some bad experience during the previous period, then they will be very happy to pass that property on to somebody who's going to be also covering all the bills for them. And next one down, we've got regular cleaning. Very often people might think that if you're taking on the property on the rent to rent, they don't have much control of who's staying in that property and whether the property would be looked after. But if within our package we provide regular cleaning, then guess what? A huge chunk of their uncertainty is taken away. Because if we are looking to look after the property, if we've got our cleaners and we've got our maintenance team and we're going to be doing some other things in place, then guess what? A lot of this uncertainty will naturally go away, especially if you emphasize on this. And this is the pain point of the specific landlord. Last but not least, safety checks. If we are looking to take on the property, of course, it's in our best interest as well as in the landlord's best interest to make sure that the property remains compliant, especially when it comes to HMOs. Regular inspections are then required. If landlord, for example, is not local, this is additional service they have to pay for somebody to go to the property once a month and carry out safety checks. So if that's included in our package, then what that gives to the landlord, again, additional peace of mind and making sure that when they reapply for a HMO license, everything will be met. Now, I want you to think about this in a way that you will obviously open up a lot of conversations moving forward. Then you're going to be talking to landlords, letting agents, traders, and people associated with the property industry in general, of course. When it comes to that, if you master your features and you master your benefits associated to those features, then you will be able to have a natural conversation in the most confident way. And then guess what? If you provide that information to them there and then they will very happily be open to have a conversation with you if they've got some properties. Even last week, I was walking out of one of my latest HMOs and there was a guy standing outside. He asked me if I need help because I was dragging some things. And I said, that's absolutely fine. I'm just going to bring up my car and I'm just going to pack it and I'm going to leave. And he was like, oh, have you just moved in here? I was like, no, I didn't actually move in here. I'm actually managing the property now. And he was like, oh, really? Because I've actually got 2 properties. One of them is done up to a very, very high standard, but I was actually thinking to manage it myself and maybe putting that on Airbnb. And we started having a great conversation, after which I took his phone number and I said, when I get a little bit more time next week, I'll give him a ring so we can set an appointment. I can come and visit him in this apartment because the apartment is waiting there for nothing. It's empty, it's standing still. And for that reason, that's the power of understanding of your features and your benefits, because if that landlord has got an apartment that's empty and not generating any money, then very likely it becomes liability and it's pulling the money away from him rather than bringing the money into his pocket. So now I can position my product. I can say that for the next 5 years, I'm going to be paying him every single month so he doesn't have to experience the same pain again. And that's the power of understanding the features and benefits of the rent-to-rent product. What is the challenge with HMOs? We all know that HMOs are houses of multiple occupancy. There are multiple people living at those properties, and typically those people are living there on single AST contracts, and majority or bigger councils these days introduce some rules and regulations that make it more challenging for landlords to get by with low quality properties. So in this module now, I want to cover some aspects of HMO compliance so that we can understand why it was introduced, but also what is it that we need to look at when we're finding and we're looking for our HMO properties for our rent-to-rent business. So let me first of all break it down to you. I don't want you to feel stressed about this because it might seem a bit overwhelming at that point that you don't understand, and there's quite a lot of it, okay? First of all, I want to say to you that each council in the UK has got their own rules and regulations about HMO compliance. So it's not that there are general rules for the entire nation and everybody has to stick to them. No, it's actually that when you are working in a specific patch and you're looking to acquire rent-to-rent properties, HMO rent-to-rent properties in that area, first of all, you need to go to the council website of this specific area and you need to learn and find out what is deemed as a HMO, whether there is a requirement for a HMO license. When is it required? When does the property need this and that? Now we're going to be breaking it all down for you. But first of all, I wanted to mention to you that there is no one size fits all solution. And when it comes to HMOs, you need to understand your patch. So this reason, you need to go to a specific council website in order to learn more about what are the requirements for this specific area, for this specific patch. So let me break down the main critical points about HMO compliance. I think I came up with 13 of them, but again, I would strongly suggest for you to go to your patch specifically and see if this really covers your area. In the first place, we've got HMO license. That's essentially the most important one, I think, out of all of them, because if you meet certain requirements in the area, then of course you will get your HMO license. Now, it's not always required for HMOs, and that's what we're going to be covering later on as well. But essentially, if we have a HMO property, then we need to make sure that the property is HMO licensed. Next, we've got EPC. So EPC is like Energy Performance Certificate. Each property needs to have one. It has to be valid. Typically, when it's issued out for 10 years. And there is also a national database where you can find if the property has got a live and ongoing EPC chart. Next, we've got gas cert. So if the property is supplied with gas, every single year, landlord is responsible for providing a gas certificate to make sure that the property is safe for any gas leaks. Next, we've got EICR. So it's an electrical certificate, and typically it's valid for 5 years. Every 5 years, it needs renewing. So the electrician, the qualified electrician, needs to come into the property and check the electrical installation for its safety. Next, we've got emergency light certificate. There is typically a requirement for emergency lights where you very often can see in commercial buildings, for example, those green signs showing that, this is the emergency route. There are some lights and lamps with some green lights in them. So they have got an additional power supply, and that's why sometimes HMOs are deemed more like commercial buildings, and for that reason they need to have emergency lights. So if there was a power cut, for example, or there was a fire and there is no power, those lamps essentially will have its own power supply so it can light up the building in case there was an emergency event. Next, we've got smoke alarms. So again, in HMOs, we need to have a certain number of smoke alarms, and each council defines how many and which areas should have smoke alarms. And even nowadays, most of them should have the mains power supply rather than just the battery power supply. But again, this is something that you can find in your specific patch to see what is the requirement for smoke alarms. CO2 detector, so carbon monoxide detector. If the property is supplied with gas, then typically around the boiler area and when the combustion is really happening, there should be a CO2 detector, because if there is a leak of the CO2, of course, the detector will pick it up and it will start raising the alarm. It's very, very detrimental for somebody's health, you see. So it's critically important that we can detect CO2 fairly quickly. Next, we've got windows. So believe it or not, but HMO property needs to have the right size windows, and they have to be installed at the right height as well. Again, each council defines those rules specifically, but if you're looking to convert the property into a HMO, or you're looking to acquire property that's an existing HMO, then it's a check that you need to make sure it's compliant to your local area, that the windows are the right size or they are actually installed at the right height. Next, we've got fire doors. So when it comes to fire doors, of course, it's all about containing the fire in the event of the fire. Of course, fire doors have to be closed at all times, and that's why HMO properties have got those self-closing mechanisms installed, so no door is actually open. If there was a fire happening in, let's say, bedroom 1, and so that fire will not just get broken down into different parts of the house very, very quickly. And typically fire doors have got that minimum 30-minute rate of containing that fire inside the room before it actually gets spread out outside of the room. Next one down, we've got pad tests. So it's every single electrical appliance and device in the house should have a valid pad test. Of course, when you buy a new appliance or the new device, it's valid for 12 months. But then 12 months later, there has to be an electrician, qualified electrician, coming in to check if the device or the appliance is working fine and it does not present any signs of wear and tear, or it's safe to use, etc., etc. And then we've got fire alarm test cert. So HMOs typically have got fire alarms installed. So once a year, there has to be a qualified person coming out to make sure that the fire alarm is working okay, meets the local compliance regulations and rules. And then at the end of it, we've got a risk assessment. Risk assessment is something that should be carried out by a qualified person. But there are also templates on NRLA website, for example, or you can find them online where you can also do it yourself. If you are a property manager, then I would suggest you learn this skill on how to conduct the actual inspection and how to fill out the risk assessment form, because this is something that you can do on your own if you want to. And it's good that you understand the property and any risks and hazards, especially if the property is going for HMO purposes. As you can see, the list is quite long, and it's not just the end of it. There are different other things, like for example, I didn't mention the intumescent strips around the door frames. You know, when the door is actually closed, there are some strips, of course, to contain the fire, to fill out the gap between the door and the door frame. So there are little things like that that will be very often in local regulations, but I didn't even mention them in here. That's why it's so important to understand the general rules, but also to go out and check your local council's website to see what are the rules and regulations in that local area. And at that point, you might be wondering, okay, so should I be looking for properties that are residential properties and I'm going to be converting them into HMOs, or should I be looking for properties with existing HMO licenses? That is a very good question. And remember that we're going to do rent to rent. Of course, we're looking to reduce our initial investment. I know people who rent out properties and then turn properties into HMOs. In my opinion, it's a necessary spend because there are enough properties that are already existing HMOs, or at least they've got everything in place. So when you take the property on, all you have to do is you just have to apply to a local council for a HMO license. When you actually do that and you've got all those steps met, you just have to wait for the inspector to come out of the council and they'll inspect the property. When you apply, you're legally allowed to operate this property as a HMO until that person come out and they check the property, and of course you will get their decision. And even if there is one thing or two things that need to be done, then they'll send you a letter. They'll give you a list of things that have to be done and they'll give you a specific time frame in which you have to meet those regulations. And when you actually do, you just have to contact the council again. The inspector will come out again to check if those things have been done, and they'll pass it off and they'll issue out a HMO license. So as you see, if you were to provide all the installations, you would have to change all the windows, for example, and provide all the fire doors and CO2 detectors and everything. It starts ramping up the cost. So ideally you want to find properties that are already an existing HMO. And right now I want to jump online and I want you to see how I would be looking for HMOs specifically in Birmingham. So now I'm going to Zoopla, and as I said, I'm going into Birmingham area. And now remember that specifically we're going to be looking for a HMO property. And for that reason, I'm just going to say it's going to be Birmingham. Bedrooms, I will say, for the purpose of this exercise, I could say 4, but I'm going to say 5 just to find it a little bit quicker. And because I want to avoid rooms, of course, that's the price for a room, I will specify a minimum price at £1,000 per calendar month. So we can skip just rooms and then we're going to be looking at entire properties. So there you go. We've got quite a few of them straight away. I'm gonna go straight into that one because that one is a 6-bedroom shared accommodation to rent, and it's 2,600. It's got 6 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. So that's what I want to go to, and I just want to see if this property will be even HMO compliant property. So in the first place, looking at the layout, there is an open plan kitchen and sitting area. So that's a good sign because that's kind of typical to HMOs. But I'm going to be looking specifically for different things. Smoke alarms, I'm going to be looking for fire extinguishers or fire blankets or self-closing mechanisms on the doors. So you see that this property is typical HMO. We can see that the room's layout, they've got the same things like bed, desk, cupboard, things that are typical to HMO rooms, but I still haven't come across the safety features. I can see there is a fire alarm over there, which is good. There is one over there, I believe, but I still cannot see other things that would be of my interest. I cannot see, for example, the doors with the self-closing mechanism. So on this one, I would probably give them a ring, and one of the very first questions I would ask would be about the HMO license, whether the property is HMO licensed, if I cannot find that in the description. Okay, maybe we can find another property so that we can find those features. Maybe that one. Okay, so as you can see straight away, I can see on the door, you can see, let me just shut this down. We can see we've got a door closing mechanism, which is great. Now we see that the property is compliant. It seems like there is also a fire alarm or a smoke alarm. So this property is more than likely going to be HMO licensed, or at least it's going to meet the compliance for the HMO license. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for. Let me have a look at the kitchen photo. And there we go. You see, on the wall, you can see there is a fire blanket over there. So it will definitely be prepped for HMO. So this property would be ideal for me to save it into my search or give them a call straight away. And obviously ask if they would be open for a company let for a HMO. So that's essentially what you're looking for when you are looking for those HMO properties. Make sure that there are some photos indicating that the property meets local regulations. If, however, there is a 5 or 6 or 7 bedroom property and you cannot find any of those on those photos, it's still no harm for you to make a call to this agent or this landlord and ask them simply if the property is HMO licensed or not. It's actually a very good and valid question. If the property is not HMO licensed, then ask the question if the property has got all the safety features to be compliant HMO. And if they say no, then I would let it go. If they say yes, then potentially you want to set a viewing because you then want to go and see if the property has got things like fire doors, windows, extinguishers, fire blankets, and so on and so on. So that's something to take into account. Ideally, we're looking for properties that are already existing HMOs because this is a fast business. We want to be making quick profits. We're not looking to renovate properties and invest like thousands and thousands of pounds into HMO compliance. If we need to just apply for a HMO license, that is absolutely fine. Another thing I wanted to show you is how to check if the property requires a HMO license or not. And now that we're obviously all around Birmingham, let's carry on with Birmingham. And here in the search bar, I've already typed in, there is a Birmingham HMO compliance requirements or HMO requirements. So I'm just going to go with HMO Birmingham compliance. And here on Birmingham City Council, it's very important that you go to the actual council's website because there will be multiple different websites, but they could be not up to date. You know that if you follow the council website, it's going to be most up to date. So I'm just going to say, what is a HMO? That's exactly what I'm looking to learn and understand. What is a HMO in their terms, right? So at least 3 tenants live there. They have to be from more than one household, and the tenants share toilet, bathroom, or kitchen facilities. So they've got some shared facilities. And the building is large HMO if the following apply: at least 5 tenants live there, and so on and so on. Okay, so there is the difference between HMO and large HMO. So 3 to 4 tenants will be small HMO, 5 tenants plus will be a large HMO in Birmingham. So they say that there are new additional HMO licensing requirements in Birmingham, and from June 23, you've got additional licensing for smaller HMOs. So properties with 3 or 4 tenants will also need HMO license. There are still many councils in the UK that will say that HMO license will apply from 5 bedrooms plus. So typically 3 people or 4 people living in one property would be classed as HMO, but you don't need a HMO license for this property. So it makes life a little bit easier for you in order to run that property as a HMO, especially if you are looking to get this property without investing a lot of money into it for meeting the local requirements, of course. I'm not saying that you should neglect your safety features in that property, especially in those smaller councils, because there is no HMO license requirement in that area. I'm just saying that you can avoid some specific spendings, and then you can just, if there are no smoke alarms, then you can just invest into smoke alarms, which are relatively cheap, and you can just provide with, fire extinguisher or fire blanket, and that property will already become much more safer, considering there will be some multiple people from multiple different households living in that same house. All right, fabulous. So we're moving forward within that HMO module. And before I go to the next session, which is about stacking your rent to HMO deal, I want to mention one other thing when it comes to compliance, and it's something ultra important when it comes to HMOs, and it's something called Article 4. So Article 4 is essentially areas in the UK that have been listed as Article 4 areas, and for this reason there are different rules and regulations in regards to turning those properties into HMOs. You see, apart from HMO licensing, there is also another thing in order to convert property into a HMO, and that is something called a property class. So in order to turn a residential property to a HMO property, you have to change the property class. If the property is not within Article 4 area, then you can do it under permitted development rights. However, if the property is already an existing property... Cicho, idź już. However, if the property sits in the area that's marked as Article 4 area, then that creates a bit of a problem, because in order to turn this property into a HMO and change the class of the property, you need to submit a full planning application. And for that reason, there could be many problems associated with it, because they introduced this to deliberately make it harder for new HMOs to start appearing in the marketplace. The local councils want to reduce the number of new HMOs, and that's why they introduce Article 4. So essentially what happens is 9 times out of 10, when somebody submits a planning application for a new HMO in the area that's already Article 4, then 9 times out of 10, the property planning permission is rejected and the property could never be granted the actual Article 4, the actual HMO, the actual planning permission to convert that property into HMO. Of course, you can appeal, and there is a good chance that you might get this planning application confirmed, but at that point, it's very uncertain, and for this reason, the whole investment becomes a little bit hard. So this is something we need to take into account as well when it comes to managing and doing rent-to-rent in areas that are Article 4. And for this reason, and exactly because of that, that is the reason why it's best to look for properties that are already existing HMOs. Because if something is an existing HMO in an Article 4 area, then you don't have to worry about planning application and planning permission, because that property is also classed as a HMO at that point, and it's got something called grandfather rights. So all you have to do is, when the HMO license expires, you just have to resubmit the actual license, the actual request for the license, and it will be extended. Now, how to find out and how to learn if Article 4 area is actually introduced in your local council? Well, very simply, you just go to Google, type in your local council, and you just have to type in Article 4, and it will actually say whether Article 4 has already been introduced in your area, whether you're already in that zone. Or if not, then that's great. You're in the Article 4 area free zone. If you are, then you have to definitely take it into account. Typically, when a council wants to turn the area into Article 4 zone, they give 12 months notice to everybody who's looking into their website. They will give 12 months notice for everybody who's looking to turn properties in that council to HMOs, and typically takes 12 months to approve Article 4, after which that time Article 4 kicks in, and from that point onwards, for every new HMO to appear in the area, you have to apply for a class change through a planning application process. And now what I want you to do, I want you to go to your local council's website or the patch that you've already chosen, and I want you to dig deeper and find out and learn whether the area where you are is actually Article 4 area, and what are the actual HMO rules and regulations in terms of the compliance to HMO properties. Once you do that, you can then go to the next phase, which is stacking your rent-to-rent HMO deal. Okay, fantastic. Let's move on to our number stacking. This is the exciting stuff, because this is where we can establish if the deal really makes financial sense or it actually doesn't. And if it doesn't, then maybe we can submit another offer for the deal to make sense for them and for us as well. So what you can see in front of you right now is a quadrant of costs, investment, gross income, and offer to landlord. We will go through this step by step as we go along, but I want you to understand that the left-hand side of the quadrant is the outgoings, and the right-hand side is the income, plus what offer we can submit to the landlord for us to make sufficient profit. So I kept the previous property, the property that we found in Birmingham, I kept it open. So now we can go back to it and we can analyze this particular deal and see how it stacks in terms of the numbers. Are you ready? Let's move on. So right in front of you, you can see that's the same property, and we will do our analysis based on that same house. So in the first place, we see that the rent is 2,250. So I'll go straight to my spreadsheet and I'll type it in as well. 2250. Awesome. Then we need to establish what are the bills for the actual property. Right now, I would say when it comes just to utilities, so electricity and gas, for one room, I would accommodate roughly about £50 per calendar month. Knowing that we've got 5 bedrooms in this property, we would simply multiply 5 times 50. That will give us 250 to accommodate for the bills. Council. So it's extremely important to understand the council band. There is a lovely website called mycounciltax.org.uk, And in order to use mycounciltax.org.uk, we need to have a specific postcode of the property. So let's go back to the ad. From the ad, we can see that the property is in B67. If I go to the map, providing the pin is in the right spot, we can tell that the property is number 64. Now, I would love to verify that, and if there was some more photos of the property, as I did it from outside, I could check if on the door, maybe on the bins, you can say number 64. But for the time being, let's establish that it's going to be 64 Vicarage Road. That's what I'm going to copy and paste to my Google. I'm going to say 64. And instead of this, I'm going to say postcode. Okay, so it gives me B677AQ. So I'll just simply copy this postcode, go back to my mycouncil.org.uk. So press search, and there should be a list of properties, including number 64. So I think there was flat 63. Interesting. 65 to 75. So quite frankly, 64 is not on that list, which is very, very strange. However, looking at those properties, you've got B, D, B, A, and then moving forward, as you can see from 65, everything is essentially A. There is 1 or 2 properties that are B. So I will make an assumption at that point that it's going to be tax band A. Of course, when you ring them, you can ask about the tax band, or maybe you would be even able to find that in the property description, which we haven't done yet. So at this point, I'll take into account 1352, kind of divided by 12, because that's per annum. Divided by 12, it would be roughly about what? 120? 112. 66. So I'll go to my spreadsheet and I'll say 112.66. Okay. Next, we've got water. Again, for 5-bedroom property, I would say it's going to be roughly between 50 and 60 pounds at that point. So let's just say we're going to put in 60. Internet shouldn't be more than 40 pounds. Cleaning, with this type of property, of course, we will be doing just communal spaces, staircases and everything. In Birmingham, I'm assuming it will cost probably about £45. I'm thinking it's going to take them between 2 to 3 hours. Let's say 3 hours. 1 hour would be about £15 per hour. So 3 times 15 would be obviously 45. So I'm just going to say 45. So these are our operating costs. Let's go back to our initial investment. So now we need to understand, looking at that property, if we have to invest in that property a bit more. So first of all, that I'm looking at that property, I can tell that the property is partly furnished. So we've got some Sofas, which is great in the sitting area. Obviously, this is the washroom. And obviously, that room is empty. This one is empty. This one has got the bed base. Kitchen is kind of like furnished. This room is furnished. So we can say that this property is partly furnished. When it comes to this, furnishing one room will cost typically about £600 to £800. So now that we can see that we've got 5 bedrooms and it's only partly furnished, I would say it will probably cost between 2 and 2.5 grand in order to furnish the property. So that's just for the bedrooms. However, we can see that in a living room, there are some sofas, but you would still need kind of like a TV and maybe like a coffee table. Typically, to furnish a living room would be somewhere between £1,000 and £1,500, but we've got sofas, which is like the significant part and the significant cost taken away. So I would say to complete this room, it will probably take maybe £500 extra. So I would say on top of the 2 grand that we said to furnish the other bedrooms, 500 plus, it's like 2.5 grand to furnish the property. So now if I go back to our spreadsheet, I'll say furniture cost here is 2,500. Repairs and renovations. Of course, it's difficult to say without viewing the property first what would be the actual renovations needed in that property. So let's go back to the photos and let's see if something requires some work. Carpets are kind of okay. Walls are classic magnolia, so it's entirely up to you whether you want to keep it in magnolia color or you want to make it a bit more modern. If you're thinking about repainting, then of course this is a cost that you have to take into account. So, okay, this room here, okay, carpet seems to be clean at least. It's not like the most modern, but it should be livable. You could get along with this carpet, okay? Kitchen. Okay. So the property could do with a little bit of renovating. And practically speaking, I know for fact, when it comes to magnolia walls, it creates this impression that this is like a student house or worn house or tired house. All of those walls could be actually very clean. My preference is to paint property white. If you do, it creates this instant effect of clean, tidy property. And then if you introduce maybe like a featured wall, or maybe you put some decorations on the walls, then obviously with a very minimal cost, you can really just uplift the value of the room and you can charge more for that. I would say in order to paint rooms, and it depends whether you want to hire somebody or you want to do it yourself. If that was your first property, I would strongly suggest that you do it because obviously you just minimize the cost of it. You just have to take into account the cost of paint. So painting maybe £100 to £200, I would say, if you do it yourself. If you don't do it yourself, then obviously you have to take the labor into account as well. But let's say that here we just need to take into account painting. I didn't notice anything that would require like urgent repair or anything like that. But obviously this is subject to viewing. So I'll go again back to my spreadsheet, and I'll repairs and renovations. I'll put in £200 for that. Then we've got the deposit. So let me go and look here because it should be more specific about the deposit in the description. So furnish, no agent fees, student can inquire, property reference, blah, 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 full description. HMO Compliant, happy days, sleeps up to 9 guests for short stays of maximum 5 tenants for long-term tenants. Okay. Free Wi-Fi, free Netflix, parking on street, fully equipped kitchen, garden, 4K TV, living room. Okay, so we don't have to even invest in a TV. So maybe the initial investment for the living room would also drop by another £200-300, which is great. Okay, which is good. Rent amount, deposit bond, 2,250. Okay, so we have to take into account the deposit. it's not that we will have to pay that amount, you know, that there will be methods to obviously minimize the deposit, but for now, let's just stick to what we've got in the advert. First rent, of course, will be the same, so it will be 2250. What I want to add on top of our repairs and renovations, let me just deduct that TV there, providing it's there, so it will be 2200. And then in terms of repairs and renovation, I want to add some decorating because as you can see, it's very empty, it's very raw, that property, and I want to revise that a little bit. So, you know, having a bit of canvas, picture would definitely make a huge difference. And for that reason, I want to allocate another £50 per room, maybe, to make it more attractive and look nice. So for that reason, another £250 maybe, and plus living room, that would be another 50. So maybe let's say 350 plus the 200 that we've got in here. That's 550. Okay, that would be my thinking behind the whole investment. So okay, we understand the cost now. We've got the initial investment listed as well. Now let's talk about the gross income. We know that we've got 5 rooms in that property. So now let's see how much we could potentially charge for it. And the best platform to check it is Spare Room. So we already established the properties in B67. Okay. So I'm going to go here and I'm just going to type in B67. And now we should have some rooms available. So make sure that we've got the right type of room listed. So whether that's going to be single, whether that's going to be double, whether that's going to be en suite, we're looking for like. And looking from those photos that we've got, we can see that there are some smaller bedrooms and there are some bigger bedrooms, like in a normal life, right? So let's see how much they charge for a double bedroom. Brand new, there is £600. There is also 525 for studio rooms. New modern ensuite. So ensuites are going for 625, 675. Okay, so they are more expensive, as you would think. Large modern double room, 625. Newly refurbished room available, 465 to 675. Ah, that's the same property, as we can say. Let's have a look. So we've got 550, 550, 550, 675, 465. So 2 of those bedrooms are actually en suite, as you can see. It's actually quite lucky that we found the same property. So we can kind of take this into account. Not that we couldn't charge more, but presuming that we're going to be charging roughly about the same, if we do our due diligence right, I would say that's double en suite, big double en suite, 675 is achievable. The smaller one would be probably closer to 600, and then the ones without ensuite could be around about 550, maybe a little bit less. So let's just say he's right about that pricing. I would just increase the price of our double ensuite to 600. So now let's say we have 550, 600, I think the next one was 550, and then 675, and then I can't remember the 5th one. 465. Okay, so that's single. I could tell from photos that one is definitely single one. So 465. Okay, we've got our gross income. Now what we need to do, we need to sum up all the 3 quadrants. So in the first place, let me just go back to the calculator and let's add it all up. $2,757. That's the cost of running this property on a monthly basis. 2,757. Awesome. Next, let's talk about the initial investment. So again, we're going to go to our calculator and make sure we clear it. So 2,200 plus 550 plus 2250 plus 2250. That equals 7250. So that would be our initial investment into this property. So in my opinion, it's a little bit high for the type of property, but let's see what would be the potential return on investment in that property and why this property would make sense or actually it wouldn't make sense. So 7250. Now the gross income. So let's go to our calculator again. We don't want to make any mistakes, so I'll just make sure that I'm adding the right numbers. 550 plus 600 plus 550 plus 675 plus 465. That goes to 2,840. So you can see straight away that the cost of running this property versus the cost of the actual profit or gross income from this property is very, very close. And for that reason, we definitely need to negotiate a better deal. Of course, there were a lot of things included in that price. So I think it was saying that the internet was included, etc., etc. But if that deal was to make a financial sense for us, we need to understand how much profit we want to make on that property. Now, we see that our highest rent is 675. So we don't want to be in a position that if tenants from this room leaves the property and for a month we've got a void and we are kind of making like a big loss. However, I would say always, when it comes to rent-to-rent deals, the minimum profit that you want to make per calendar month is £500. This is like a non-negotiable, okay? If somebody is offering you a rent price at you making £400 per calendar month, it's down to you whether you want to take all that risk for the sake of £400 each calendar month. I would say 500 is absolute minimum, but this is a 5-bedroom property, so we've got 5 different tenants in it, so I wouldn't make it less than 600 if that was me to make profit in that one single property. But I would obviously go in with a lower offer, so I could make ideally around £700 profit in that property. Okay, now we need to get down to what is it that we can actually offer to this landlord. Providing he didn't say that he's not including internet and water and other things in his thingy, we need to understand what is the cost of all the expenses excluding rent, because rent is something that we will be giving to the landlord, of course. So we will say 2757 minus 2250. Our bills are actually £507. This is the cost of running the property excluding rent. On top of that, what we need to do, we need to add our ideal profit. As we said, we're going to start with £700 profit, so we're going to say 700. We've got 1,207. This amount we have to subtract from our gross income. So if our gross income is 2,840, that equals to £1,633. Essentially, £1,633 is the amount that we can afford to pay landlord every single month in order to make £700 profit. So you could think at that point, oh, there's a huge gap between what this landlord wants. He wants 2,250 and I can only offer him £1,633. Is that a lot though? When we start taking into account his management fees, when he takes into account the volatility of the bills, the potential voids and the maintenance that he spent money on in the last 12 months, all of a sudden, if you use the right arguments, you can very easily drop the 2,250 down to this amount if the landlord understands the value of it. Ultimately, what you can do as well, you can go back to the landlord and say, if he's happy to take on all the bills and pay for everything, the £507 that we can add, minus 507 that he would take on, we're happy to pay him £2,140. So if he's happy to pay all the bills, we will manage the property for him. We're not actually far off. Can you see the difference between 2250 and 2140? You know, considering you're going to be doing a lot of work for a long period of time, that can be very, very appealing to this landlord, especially if he's looking to rent out the entire property rather than managing it himself. I hope you start seeing this value in this. And very often people come across the objection or the problem that there is a huge gap between what this landlord wants and what is it that we can actually offer. If that all makes sense, I would love you to find at least 5 properties right now in your local patch, and you will do exactly the same exercise using the same method. I want you to do the quadrant. I'm hoping that you're taking a lot of notes, and you eventually will come up with the offer to the landlord so you can see if you're getting close, or you would have to negotiate quite heavily with the landlord on the potential deal. Now, I want you to go out, find 5 leads, and obviously go and try to do the quadrant exercise. And I know it's daunting, it is time consuming to calculate those things, and for that reason, what we actually prepared in the 30-day challenge I spoke to you about before, we provide calculators for HMO and service accommodation as well. So rather than taking a long time to go through those numbers, it takes literally seconds to put in the figures in a calculator in order to see how much actually you can offer to the landlord in order to make your ideal profit. If that makes sense, go and join the 30-day challenge straight away, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you very soon. Other than that, let's move on with the program. All right, so now we've got all the numbers in place. So the final thing we have to establish right now is the return on investment, ROI. If you've been doing something in property or investments, you already came across the term ROI, which obviously stands for return on investment. And how are we going to determine a return on investment in this particular case? Well, it's fairly simple. In the first place, we need to understand how much net profit we're going to be making per annum. And we've already established that we're going to be making £700 per calendar month. And for this reason, we need to do a simple calculation, 700 times 12 months. That gives us a total profit of 8,400 in a year. That number now has to be divided by our initial investment, which is 7,250. That gives us 1.15. Essentially what it means is that in 1 year of investing in this rent-to-rent deal, we're going to get our money back 1.15 times. So the return on investment is 115%. That's what we can say. Now, what is a good investment in rent-to-rent? Different people might have different opinions. In my opinion, if you can find a deal that gives you a complete return on investment in 3 to 6 months, that is a great deal. 6 to 9 months, that is a good deal. 9 to 12 months, it's average deal. So it's not the best, it's not the worst. I definitely wouldn't recommend you to go for a deal that does not come back to you with your initial investment within 12 months. That's for sure. However, I would say a very good investment is somewhere between 6 to 9 months. It's very realistic. Deals are out there. And for this reason, based on this example, we can see that this investment is okay, but we could do probably a little bit better. So we're just going to say ROI is 1.15 if we remember rightly, or if somebody prefers 115%, but our goal ideally would be minimum 200%. I hope that this calculation is simple. You understand how I came up with those numbers. We would be aiming at 200% return on investment from a deal. This deal is 115%. So what it is that we actually need to do right now? Well, we can either say we're happy with the numbers and go ahead with everything as we see, providing landlord is obviously happy with the offer that you would submit to him. Or another thing that we can do is we can negotiate some terms on the actual deal. So we would either have to find a way to reduce the cost of furniture, we would have to reduce the cost of repairs, reduce the cost of deposit, or reduce the cost of rent. These are essentially things that you can do. As you can see, it's all listed here. So we just need to find a way or make the deal more attractive for us. So overall, the return on investment is much better for us at the end of it. So what it is that we could do in this particular case in order to make our deal more attractive? In the first place, I certainly would say to the landlord that if we are going to put some money into the refurb and we're going to be investing our money, first of all, I would ask him for a grace period, because if we are going to spend some time in that property to increase the value of his property, then it would sound fair actually if he gave us some time to actually go into the property and do the work. Typically, you could negotiate 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe even 2 months, depending on how much work needs to go on that property and what's the rapport that you actually built with this landlord. So in the first place, what we can do is we can ask for grace period. Ideally, when we get some grace period, let's say it's going to be a month, we're going to go into the property, we're going to spend initial week or two on the works that obviously we want to do, but in the meantime, we can start listing the property and start getting the interest, ideally getting the tenants in the property, or if it's a service accommodation, it can already be listed on booking portals such as booking.com or Airbnb or Vrbo, for example, and then you can start getting those bookings coming in. So when the property goes live, you can already start generating income. Second thing we could do is definitely we could say to the landlord that if we are looking to invest some money into this property and we're going to naturally increase value of this property and we will attract higher quality guests or tenants, then we would definitely like to pay less deposit. So we can say, how about if we're going to pay just 50% deposit? Or how about if we're going to pay just 20% deposit? Or how about if we will replace the deposit, you will still be protected and we will get the right form of insurance to replace our deposit. A lot of landlords these days are happy with those solutions. They understand why you would like the deposit to be limited, because the money that you would pay them for a deposit, you can of course reinvest into that property. So we can say lower or eliminated deposit. Another thing you could do in that case is you could say that if you're looking to invest some money into this deal, you would ideally want this deal not for 3 years, but for 5 years. And what it actually is, we're extending the duration of the contract. And for that reason, this property will be making us money for 2 more years, which is brilliant. So let's say longer contract. And what else we could do in this case? Let me just zoom it in a little bit so we can see better. What else could that be? You could also negotiate better conditions when it comes to maintenance. So we could say, if we're going to take so much risk and we are going to put in some money into this deal in the first place, how about if you will take on the responsibility of all the costs for the maintenance? So we're shifting the liability for minor maintenance to the landlord. So we could just say, shift maintenance liability. These are things that come straight into my mind that we could do in this particular deal. And of course, what I would always suggest when it comes to negotiations is when you go to the viewing, take your phone with you and start taking photos, or even better, take a video of your viewing. What's going to happen after the viewing, there is a good chance that you will be missing some things when you're at the viewing. So then what you can do, you can sit down and you can watch that video for 2 or 3 times, and then you will notice things that you didn't spot at the viewing. All of a sudden, you can find some flaws, some snags at the property that you can leverage against the rent or against the deposit or against other terms and conditions in the contract in order to influence landlords in order to give you better terms and conditions. In other words, use what you saw at the property, go back to them with an offer and tell them my offer is this much because of XYZ. List things that you didn't like. List things that you are going to improve in his property that will naturally increase the value of his property, that will naturally attract higher quality people in his property. And in exchange, of course, you're asking for a lower deposit, you're asking for some grace period. In rent to rent, these type of agreements are absolutely normal, so do not be afraid to ask for it. But however, if you find a property that has got everything in place, it's got the furniture in place and the property is very, very high standard and high quality, it does not mean that all of a sudden you have to come up with some questions about grace periods or lower deposit, because if the property is of high quality and you can essentially rent it out straight away, then why would you negotiate different conditions in order to upset the landlord? It's not the case. My very first property, as I mentioned before, was a nice high standard 5-bedroom 5-suite HMO, fully furnished. I didn't have to do anything about that property, and it was just my goodwill that I provided some cooking pans, cooking pots, cutlery, and other utensils to the kitchen, which it costed me about £250 maybe. So the initial investment was minimal. Of course, I didn't have to put in any of my time in order to dress that property and get this property ready for my tenants. And for this reason, I was happy with a normal deposit. I was happy with all the terms and conditions that we agreed in the first place. And I didn't have to go through a heavy negotiation phase. But sometimes, if the property needs a little bit of your attention, a little bit of your care and love, then that gives you an absolute right to go back to the landlord or the letting agent and ask for some of those things in order to make the deal more attractive and definitely get your return on investment closer or even more than 200%. That's what you're aiming at. So now we understand our numbers. We know exactly how much we can offer to this specific landlord in your specific case. So now the next step in the whole process is for you to submit your offer to this landlord or to this letting agent. So here are the steps that you need to take in order to submit your offer. And before I go into those steps, I want to tell you that I learned a very heavy lesson on this particular step. Because one of my courses before was telling that no matter what you do, it's best to communicate to people verbally. So if you can call them, call them. And as much as I agree with this, I believe that submitting offers is an exception. So ideally, if you can submit your offer in writing, this will work much, much better for you. I remember one of my first viewings and lovely 6-bedroom property. I then wrote down all the numbers and all the benefits and features associated with, the plans and what I wanted to do with the property. So I had it all written down. It took me maybe 10-15 minutes to get myself together, pull myself together, ring the agency and tell them what it is that I'm looking to do. And to be honest with you, it felt a little bit awkward when I first rang them and I was like going through what I'm looking to do. And I kind of felt that the agent was like, yeah, okay, right. She was waiting for me to say, what is my final offer? And when I got to this point finally, I gave her my offer, and it kind of turned into this awkward moment because I think the offer at that point was not acceptable to them. But I also felt that I was kind of pushing it and there was no flow. I didn't feel it. So very quickly, I realized that submitting offers via phone is not helping anybody. Especially it's not helping the letting agent. Why? Because letting agent's role is to submit every single offer to a landlord. Unless the landlord doesn't want to hear about offers, for example, below £2,000, and if they receive an offer below £2,000, then they don't have the obligation to submit that offer to them. But if the offer is within his scope, then their job and their role, and it's a must for them to submit that offer to this landlord. And for this reason, I felt that my offer is not going anywhere because it was verbal. If it's in writing, you make it easy for the letting agent to submit that offer to the landlord, because all they have to do is they just have to click forward button, put in the email address of the landlord, and that's it. If you do it all verbally, of course, a lot of details that you submit verbally will not be written anywhere. It's not going to be captured, and for that reason, your offer will be very much softer. It's not going to have the punch and the kick, and it's not going to capture all the key ingredients and key features and the great benefits that you're offering alongside your rent-to-rent business. And for that reason, I urge you to focus on submitting your offers in writing through emails, because this will give you much better results and you will feel much better about it, but also it will make everybody's life easier. So let's move on to the ingredients of your ideal offer. First of all, when you're at the viewing, agree the next steps. So tell them that within 24 hours or within 12 hours, or give a specific time frame you're going to be doing XYZ. So I typically go to a viewing and I'll say that within the next 24 hours you will hear back from me. I'll send you an email on this and this address. I'll confirm if the address is right, and I'll say I'll specify exactly everything that I'm looking to do with this property, my rent and everything else, and you'll get that email from me within the next 24 hours. So that's it. That will be the first step. It's very important, because if we don't agree anything at the viewing, it becomes loose and it's you showing lack of interest to the property. However, if you're saying that you're going to do something within the next 24 hours, then you're showing you've got further interest in this property and they take you seriously. Very, very important step. Second thing is fulfill your arrangements. No matter what you say you're going to do it. If you don't, regardless of whether you want to take this deal, whether you want to submit offer, if you don't do what you say you're going to do, you're going to lose a lot of rapport. Essentially, your contact and the relationship that you've built will be ruined. And you don't want to get to that point, right? So if you say that you're going to send an email within 24 hours, do it. If you say that you're going to be giving them a ring in the next 12 hours, do it as well. If you say that you're going to be arranging this, that, and the other, just fulfill on your word, because your word is the most precious thing you've got at that point. So stick to it, and whatever you say you're going to do, just do it. Point number 3 is submit your offer in writing. Of course, we've already spoke about this, and now I want to give you some pointers and I want to break it down for you what your ideal email should include. You can do it in 2 ways. If you've already got some logos, if you've got some colors behind your branding and so on, you can create something in Canva or any other soft piece of software and create your own sort of PDF format, so that it looks nice and professional, and it's just nicer for somebody to view it and read it. But it does not have to be. It can be just written in a normal email, just a normal text, and it's something that you can create very, very easily. So, in the first place, thank them for the opportunity to spend time with you during viewing and for the opportunity for you to view the property. Secondly, provide your rent offer. So say, based on everything that we saw, we're happy to offer this much for this property. And then summarize your service features. So you want to tell them what is it that you're looking to provide with this rental, right? So you're going to provide this much fixed rent. You're going to provide that many years. That's going to be the duration of the contract. All the features, including things like we're going to fix the rent, we're going to focus on paying the bills and things like that. Things that will capture the retention, especially if you ask the right questions at the viewing and you understand what the pain points are of a specific letting agent or landlord in that case. You can then see that for them what matters the most is, for example, a maintenance coordination or maintenance minor cost cover. So if you want to emphasize on that, that will also be beneficial in your email. Moving forward, we've got to highlight your plans with this property. So if you've got some plans, you're looking to paint the property, you're looking to decorate it, you're looking to accommodate contractors in the area, tell them what it actually is that you're looking to do with this property, because if you show them your long-term vision, they will naturally have more trust in your knowledge, in your expertise, and you will naturally look like somebody who knows what they're doing. Ask for a prompt answer. So of course, you want to provide value and you want to fulfill your arrangements, but on the flip side, you also cannot leave it loose for them. So if you say, and you do something within 24 hours, for example, ask them for the same thing. So if you say, I would appreciate your answer within 24 hours, if we don't hear back from you within 24 hours, I would like to give you a call to discuss this matter further. If you say this, you're giving yourself that sort of additional gate so that if they don't come back to you within 24 hours, you're going to be calling them. It gives more urgency and it works very, very well. If you skip this step, trust me, you can find yourself in a position where 24 hours later, nobody will call you or you will be chasing them because you didn't give yourself this gate. Very, very important when you submit your offers. Alrighty then, so I think at this point we can do a bit of a recap of what we covered so far in the video. So we know what HMO is, we know how to stack HMO numbers, we know what a good return on investment is and how to calculate return on investment. We've covered negotiations and what it actually is to make your deal even better. We've covered HMO compliance and also Article 4. So we are getting there. We're getting forward with our knowledge, especially about HMOs. However, at this point, I want to say we're coming close to this point where I'm going to say to you, if you are just about to take one thing from this video, we are just about to cover it. And I get plenty of questions about this particular aspect. This is one thing that makes rent-to-rent legal. A lot of people in the UK and around the globe really think that rent-to-rent is actually illegal. I don't know how things work in different countries, but I certainly know how it works in the UK, and I'm sure there is always a way around certain rules and regulations. In the UK, we have to make sure that we use the right contract. So this session will be very, very important for you if you want to make a good living and good profit out of rent to rent, because in order to make good profit out of rent to rent, you need to make sure it's going to be done legally correct. So are you ready for that? Management agreement. That's what we're going to be talking about right now. Why is it a management agreement and not AST contract, for example? So essentially, we need to understand what is the difference between illegal subletting and illegal rent to rent. Of course, if we used AST contract is a typical contract that falls under the Housing Act 2004. And for this reason, if we rented out a property under the AST and then we kept on subletting this property to other people, that will be violation of rules and regulations in the UK. So what actually makes the whole rent-to-rent thing legal is the contract called a management agreement. And what makes the management agreement different from other types of contract is that we're not going to be working within the Housing Act 2004, and instead the management agreement will be binding two parties beyond the Housing Act 2004. It's critically important because we cannot make this thing legal if we operate within the Housing Act of 2004. However, the management agreement is still legally binding two parties. In this case, it will be your company and the landlord's company or landlord individually. That's what makes rent-to-rent legal and does no longer class as subletting. So if anybody is telling you guys that rent-to-rent is illegal, it cannot be made legal, just tell them what you know from this piece of content I just gave you. Because if we sign the wrong contract, of course it will be illegal. That's why we need to set a limited company. And that's why we need to use the right management agreement. That's why we need to act beyond the Housing Act 2004 to make the whole thing legal. When you do it in the right way, in the right format, with the right contract, then guess what? Your business is legal and it's making the profits legally correct. Of course, then your profits are then subject to taxation, corporation tax, and so on and so on. But this video is not an accountancy advice. So I hope at this point you understand what is actually making a huge difference between the normal contract and the management agreement. And now that we understand it, let's cover some basic key ingredients that have to be included in the management agreement. In the first place, there has to be names. There has to be a name of your company as one party, and there has to be a name of the landlord. So whether the landlord is individual or whether the landlord is a company as well, both parties' names or companies' names have to be included in that contract. The contract needs to specify the term or how long the contract will actually last. So if we say the contract will be valid for 36 months, we need to specify that in our management agreement. Another very important feature of the management agreement is the rent. we definitely need to include the rent amount in that contract, and it typically has to be specified as a fixed or guaranteed rent, however you want to frame it. Each management agreement will also include the effective date, which is the date from which the contract stands, it's in force, and from which date you're responsible and liable for the property and to pay the rent, and of course to make profits and sublet the property in the right way. Big chunk of my management agreement is focusing around maintenance, and it very clearly specifies who is responsible for which part. You see, you can do everything if you want, but you will put your business at a huge risk, and for that reason your management agreement has to specifically determine what it actually is that you're responsible for and what it is that the landlord is responsible for, who's paying for what and how much. It's very, very important, especially things like a broken boiler or a broken roof. These things are very, very expensive, so these things definitely cannot be your responsibility. Otherwise, you can end up in a big financial loss and you can end up closing up your company because financially you're not going to be able to sustain your business. Another very important thing in your contract is the break clause. Although we are signing contract for 3, 4, 5 years, there could be a break clause for landlord, there could be a break clause for the tenant or the company, and typically they will be the same. However, it does not have to go that way. You can specify that the landlord can use the break clause within the first 12 months of the agreement, but you as the tenant or you as a company can execute break clause within the first 6 months of the contract. And what break clause actually says is when can you exit the contract without any repercussions, without any consequences. So if you want to protect yourself in case the property does not perform the way you would like it to perform, you can say that the contract is signed for 3 years. However, after 12 months, you can exit the contract. There won't be any consequences. There will be no penalties, no extra fees. You can legally exit the contract and you can just hand the keys back to the landlord and he can do whatever he wants with the property. I think it's a phenomenal way to protect you, but also the landlord, because the landlord has to feel safe about this deal as well. It always has to work both ways. Remember that. So do never try to make it as best as possible for yourself, but the landlord is not getting the same sort of fair chances within this agreement. Of course, contract should be much more than that. I'm just giving you some highlights and bullet points of what are the key elements of the management agreement. However, you shouldn't be doing that yourself because this is a legally binding contract. This is a very important document that will run your entire business. The contract that I'm using and my students and clients are using is specifically written by a rent-to-rent solicitor, somebody who specializes in property industry and rent-to-rent agreements. So our contract is watertight. And when you step into the world of rent-to-rent, you need to make sure that your contract is as watertight as possible and it determines as many situations as possible. So if it actually happens, there won't be any ambiguity and everybody knows who's responsible for what. And even if worst case scenario, you ended up at PRS or property ombudsman or even at the court, the contract will clearly say who was responsible for what, and then it will be so easy to say, okay, this person is responsible or this company is not responsible. I hope you're following me on that. So now I want you to go to the workbook and make big fat letters on the right type of agreement that you have to make in order to make rent-to-rent legally correct. If you haven't remembered that yet, I want you to write it down in big capital letters, management agreement. Okay, so now that we've submitted our offer got accepted, and we have signed the right management agreement contract, the next step is for us to start marketing the rooms, because in order to start making money, we need to market the rooms, populate rooms with great ideal tenants who will be paying us every single month. That's the whole logic behind the business model, right? So let me talk to you a little bit more about marketing the rooms. And I believe that you've already seen rooms in many other ways, through different portals, through different formats. I want to show you how to effectively market your rooms so that you get full occupancy, so that it's nice and simple and easy to communicate and to advertise with people who are looking for those rooms. So providing your property is in the right patch and there is a good demand, you will not struggle with this step. if you follow it step by step, as I'm going to show you in a second. So in the first place, let's cover where it's best to advertise your rooms in the UK right now. So my favorite and the best platform that I'm using all the time is called Spare Room. Spare Room is an amazing platform. It's been designed specifically for people who are looking for different flatmates, who are looking for rooms, for house shares, and HMO strategy works perfectly in line with Spare Room. So if you're doing rent to HMO and you've got rooms, Spare Room is a must in your business. Secondly, we've got Open Rent. And although Open Rent is a platform for landlords, private landlords, you can also advertise your rooms on Open Rent. Next one down is Facebook and Facebook groups. Of course, you can post that on your Facebook wall. You can then share it to different Facebook groups. Let's say you've got rooms available in Bristol, for example, then I would strongly suggest for you to go to Facebook groups, type in Bristol rooms, Bristol accommodation, and so on and so on. You know, ideas are endless. You can join a lot of groups and you can just create posts advertising your rooms. So you will start getting inquiries through Messenger and through comments as well under your post. Last but not least, we've got local letting agents, and this is something that I'm doing quite regularly as well. You see, you don't have to have all the network and the right tools in order to find tenants for your rooms. Instead, let's say that if you're in Bristol, there will be plenty of letting agents who are getting inquiries from people looking for rooms. If you connect with them and you agree on a fee for them to pass you leads, they can advertise that property for you, or they can pass their leads on to you so you can show them rooms. And if you successfully rent that room to a lead coming from that letting agent, then guess what? It's okay to give them a small fee because you're going to be making money from that tenant anyway. So it just increases your reach, it increases your possibilities, and it decreases your voids. Your occupancy will be even higher when you use all four of those points. Now, I very quickly want to show you what my currently running ad looks like so you can see what are the photos like, what is the text like, and you can inspire yourself for your rooms and for your description and for your photos when you advertise your rooms or when you advertise your future rooms. So as I mentioned, I'm on Spare Room. I'm using Spare Room all the time, as I said, and this is my ad. So as you can see, we've got some photos here, and the first photo is showing the room available because obviously at different times I'm advertising different rooms, but this is essentially the property. It's nice, it's very high, lovely, standard, and it shows the rest of the property. Next, we've got some details and some descriptions. So in the first sentence, I always focus on when the property is actually available, and typically I'm going to say it's for one person. If you don't say that, you'll get naturally a lot of people inquiring who are looking for rooms for a couple or for a few people. Obviously, if your room does allow just one person for HMO license restrictions, for example, then make sure that you're going to mention that somewhere at the top of your advert. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of inquiries from people who are unfortunately looking for room for multiple people. Okay. As you can see, I like this little emoji. It makes the ad stand out and look a little bit nicer visually. So that's what I'm saying. Details about the house, details about the rooms, or the room, I should say, details about the location, details about the parking, and I say why to choose us, why to inquire with us, and I'm giving them plenty of different reasons why we are actually better than the competition in the marketplace. So great living space, regular cleaning, health and safety standards in place, no hidden costs, professional housemates, 24-hour a day helpline. These things are typical, and that's what we provide. Okay, so I then encourage people to contact us. As you can see, there is that call to action. So contact us via phone, via email. So they can contact us through message, they can contact us through phone call if they prefer. We get both. We get more messages, I would say, but we also get quite a few phone calls as well here and there. So Spare Room is definitely one. Once you set your Spare Room ad, then you can very easily copy and paste that to your Facebook post, advertise the same pictures, and boom, it's all done. I'm not going to go into detail on how to take photos. I trust that you can inspire yourself from a lot of different Google/YouTube videos, and you can just get some tips and tricks on how to take quality photos of properties. Just one thing I want to mention to you is always that first photo must be like the best photo that you can ever take, okay? Because that photo ultimately is the avatar. That's what they see in the first place. If that first photo is not great, then the number of inquiries will dramatically decrease, which will have a negative impact on your occupancy. At this point, you're guessing right. After marketing the rooms, what's going to happen is more people will be getting in touch with you, asking, sending inquiries, asking questions, learning more about the rooms that you've got advertised. Before I move forward, right now I just had a bit of a play with the different views, so I just chose the circle view rather than a square view. For some reason, it just changed in the middle of the program, but now I deliberately changed that back to circle, so I hope you like that as much as I do. So let me talk to you about a step-by-step process. Some of those steps might seem obvious, might not seem obvious, but if we discuss that, we all can make an informed decision about our process of how to onboard our tenants. So we're gonna bridge the point of contact from somebody to a point where somebody is actually moving into the property, because there is a little bit of a process that you need to hone into in order to make sure that the tenants that will be moving into your properties are the right fit for you and your business. So let's say that somebody saw your ad and they make a phone call. My drawings are, by the way, not the best. You can probably tell. So, okay, somebody's making a phone call. Somebody's meeting you, or somebody that's associated to you, at the property in order to view. Now, this viewing can be done physically, or sometimes it can be done virtually. There could be a video viewing as well. I've rented out many, many rooms just from a video conference or from the video call. And from that point, if they like it, you are going to get a yes. So they say, I like the property and I want to move in. What to do next after this happens? Let me list it down for you, and I'll try to zoom it in as best as I can in order for you to see it. So in the first place, I want to make sure that I'm working with somebody who's confident they want to move in, so we don't waste anybody's time. And for this reason, I'm asking them to submit a holding deposit of £100 typically for a room or per room, in order for them to secure it for 7 days, for us to stop advertising the room, and for us to begin the onboarding process. So I would say holding fee. Next, I'm asking them to fill out the application form. An application form is all about collecting details that are of my interest to learn more about them, about their situation. So, application form. Once I'm happy with the application form, the next natural step for me is to carry out referencing. And once I'm happy with all the references, I'm issuing out a draft AST contract. From that point, if they are happy with everything and I'm happy with everything, AST contract is then signed, we agree on the move-in date. I'm asking them to submit a security deposit. And once the security deposit is submitted, we just wait for the day they move in. Ideally, I want to get their first month's rent that they submit to me just before they move in. Or the worst case scenario is when I meet them at the property, or somebody, my representative, is meeting somebody at that property and they come to collect the key. We also ask them to submit a first month's rent as well. So that essentially is our onboarding process from the moment when somebody rings us, from the viewing, from their yes, all the way through to them actually coming in, collecting the key, and for them to pay the first month's rent up front. At that point, they will also collect the key. We will also sign with them the inventory, and we have our new tenant. So at that point, you might be asking, okay, tell me a bit more about the application form or referencing, because these steps are essential. These are like critical steps in order to make sure that you don't face any challenging situations in the future where somebody does not pay you rent on time, or somebody has devastated the property, for example, because you have not done enough good work to filter out those good quality people from those people who perhaps haven't got great intentions behind them. So in the first place, I'm going to be taking their details, like their personal details, like name and date of birth. I'm also asking them to provide me some details of the current accommodation, including the landlord's details and letting agent's details. So I'm just going to say, this, of course, will naturally allow me to contact them in order to ask some questions about the prospective tenant, if they cause any problems, if they always paid rent on time, and if any bad situations happened in the past. As you can figure out, if I asked for the current address details, I'm also asking for the current employment details. This will allow me to establish whether they have the right affordability in place, whether they have sufficient income in order to satisfy the rent. So I'm just going to say current employment. I'm also asking for a point of contact. So it will be typically somebody from the HR department, somebody who I can reach out to, either ring or send an email and ask them a few questions just to confirm that they do work in the place where the tenant or prospective tenant is saying they are actually working for. I'm also asking for some form of confirmation about how they manage their finances. So typically it will be last 3 months bank statements. So I'm just going to say bank statements for last 3 months. Last 3 months. Sometimes they suggest that instead of bank statements, they can provide you with payslips. I accept payslips, that's absolutely fine to me. It's another form of confirmation that they generate income. And of course, from that, we can establish if they have enough affordability in order to rent out rooms. Typically, when it comes to affordability, I'm just going to make a note here. Let me very quickly show you how I'm actually doing my affordability test if I'm doing referencing myself. So a good practice is to understand that if the room rent, for example, is £500, I would multiply that number by 30, which in this case would give me £15,000, and that will be my minimum annual salary from that person in order to say that they have good affordability for my room. So remember, it's the room rent times 30 should be equal or more than their annual salary. That's my affordability check. Let me go back to my list of other things that are required from my application form. One very important thing I would suggest you always do is the credit check. You can always ask them if they had any previous bad situations, if they have some CCJs perhaps outstanding. But if you ask them, they not always might tell you the truth. So you can carry out your own credit check on the particular tenant. What I would suggest is when you start out, I would never do it on your own because this process takes a bit of skill, some practice, and also you, of course, you're not going to be able to do your credit check on your own. And for this reason, I would use a separate agency, somebody who can do your referencing for £20 typically. For this work, I would suggest advanced rent. Let me write it down. Utilize advanced rent and they will conduct all your safety checks for the particular tenant. They will do all the referencing, and at the end of it, they'll send you a full report of this person saying how risky it is to rent this room to this particular person. And at the end of the day, you have to make your own decision based on the facts and details that you've already gathered about this particular person. If you're happy with everything, the next natural step for you will be to send the AST contract. And once they're happy with the AST contract, they can sign it. What I typically do with my AST contracts is I'm sending them the e-copy, or I use the software that allows me to send a copy of my AST contract for them to e-sign that. It makes things very, very easy, very, very simple. But when I first started my business, I was operating on hard copies. So I was literally bringing in to the property. So I was literally bringing in a hard copy of the contract, printed out. And on the day when I was meeting them at the property, when they actually moved in, I asked them to sign the AST contract, and we just did it this way. Another way you can do it if you don't want to pay for the e-signing software is you can also send them a PDF document, and you can give them a little bit of instruction on how to use Adobe or other PDF software that allows them to sign the document and send it to you electronically via email. I will talk a little bit more deeper into the detail about AST contracts just in a second, but now I wanted to present to you the entire process so that you can clearly see step by step what we have to do in order to make somebody successfully onboarded and moved into your property. Once the AST contract is signed, get them to submit their payment to you. So ideally, you're taking the security deposit and your first month's rent up front. Remember that at some point at the beginning, we took the holding fee. Holding fee is something that you deduct from somebody's first month's rent. So if that rent, for example, was £500 and we took £100 holding fee from them, then of course the first month's rent will be £400 to begin with, plus the security deposit of agreed amount. For security deposit, I would always suggest that you take minimum of 1 month's rent in order to be protected and be well covered if you plan to take your security deposits. And once they pay in, that's great. You just wait for the date when you agreed on their moving in. You will meet them at the property, or you will find another way to hand the key to them on the day when they move in and they can successfully complete their tenancy. This process works extremely well for me. This is something that at the beginning I was doing manually, but over time, as I started scaling up my business, I got myself a managing software called Coho. Now, this is not something that you have to take and get into your business to begin with, but definitely as you start growing and growing, there are some roles and responsibilities that you have when you're facing tenants. One of those things is definitely when they complete the paperwork that you know they are moving in, you have to provide them with some paperwork about the property. You need to provide them with EPC, EICR, and other certificates that obviously are part of the compliance of the building, so that you have to prove to them the property is completely safe for them to move in. It's a legal requirement. It's something that you will physically have to send to them in order to meet your legal obligations. I don't have to do it because I've got a managing software. So when somebody's onboarded into the system automatically sends them email with all those documents. So I've got a big step off my shoulders and I don't have to do it every time somebody new moves into the property. It's up to you when you decide that you want to take a managing software to support your business. I would suggest that you can easily manage your business with 1 or 2 properties. When you start getting more properties and more tenancies, I would suggest starting to think about HMO software, because then it will make your life very, very easy and it will take away a lot of admin stuff from you. If you're interested in the managing software for HMOs and you would like to see if Coho is for you, I will leave a link in my description so we can go click and have a look if this software is something for you. And if you do like it, make sure you register yourself and start using a managing software. And to finally complete our onboarding process, I want to mention last couple of things. Thing number 1 is you always have the legal obligation to check the tenant's passport physically. It's not that they can just send it to you. Of course, that's all right if you want to just get some details of them, but it's your responsibility or your representative's responsibility to physically take their passport and take a copy. This way, we're confirming that we physically check that they've got their ID and it's them actually presenting this ID, and it's them on the photo and it's them presenting their personal details. This is a legal requirement that you cannot skip because there are huge penalties for that if you don't stick to it. And one other thing you have to check is their right to rent. It does not concern British citizens. You don't have to check their right to rent because they have naturally the right to rent in the UK. But if somebody is not a British citizen, then naturally they will have some form of visa format, right? Or different type of settlement status. This is something that you have to check. In order to do it, you have to ask your prospect tenant to provide you with a share code for the right to rent. They then have to go to the government website and they have to generate a 9-digit share code that will be unique just for them. Then they have to share this share code with yourself. You have to go to the same government website, type in that 9-digit code, type in whether you're an agent or a landlord and their date of birth. Once you confirm the details, you will see what is their visa status with the Home Office. You'll see how long they can stay in the UK, and when does their visa expire. If that visa is expiring in some time, you definitely need to make a note that just before that time, you need to ask them for either a new share code showing that they can stay in the UK for longer, or if they cannot provide this, then you will have to terminate that contract because they will no longer have the permission to rent in the UK. Take this very, very seriously because you don't want to be responsible for huge penalties that the Home Office can put on you if you don't do those checks right. Again, if you decide to go through advanced rent, they will carry out the right checks for you. As promised to you, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the AST contract, and right next to the management agreement, it's another very important document that's legally binding you and the tenant and outlines all the terms and conditions that are standing between your company and this individual moving into the property that you're technically responsible for. In the first place, let's break down what actually AST stands for. AST stands for a short hold tenancy agreement or contract. And essentially, it's the most popular type of agreement for a traditional letting in the UK. It's the most powerful and the most respected by the courts and any other type of organizations like PRS, for example, that respect this type of agreement. For your business, AST contract will be definitely the right contract to use. Sometimes, very rarely, people use something called a lodger's agreement. And lodger agreement is something that's not as powerful. It hasn't got so much force. It's much harder to reinforce the conditions of the lodger's agreement, but at the same time, it's easier to evict tenants if this happens to the worst. So typically, lodgers agreements are used if you're a living in landlord and then you're just renting out a room or two rooms from that property to individuals. So technically, you can then use a lodgers agreement. But if you're looking to rent out the entire property and then rent individual rooms to other people, then typically AST contracts would work perfectly in that scenario for HMOs. And we're talking specifically about rent to HMO strategy, right? So this will work perfectly well. So I've got a little bit of a treat for you here. I'm going to show you very quickly an agreement, an AST contract that I'm using in my business, and I give obviously access to my private clients as well. So we're all using the right AST contract that has been drafted by a professional rent-to-rent solicitor. And there we go. We've got our AST contract in front of us. And let me just break it down to you. What are the elements of the AST contract? In the first place, of course, it's got a clear headline. It's got a clear title to the document, so we know straight away what type of document we're dealing with, right? In the first place, we've got dates. We've got the details, again, talking about who's renting out, who's going to be renting out, of course. So, details of our company and details of the individual that we're making this agreement with. We're talking about the rent amount. We're talking about how often it's actually payable. We indicate other things like, for example, a lead tenant if applicable. Then we talk about the property itself. So we specify the address of the property. We address what is the room number if they just rent out the room. And again, dates. So when is the effective date? When is the date when they actually move in? And how long is the contract signed for? So typically it could be 6 months, it could be 9 months, or 12 months. We also determine the deposit details, so where the actual deposit will be held. Because if you're taking deposits from tenants in the UK, you cannot keep it in your bank account. You're legally obligated to take the money and submit that to another government approved organization such as DPS or TDS, and you have to create that tenancy, send the deposit to them, and then they hold the money. And when the tenant decides to move out, you just have to do the inspection. You just have to make any deductions if applicable. And then you have to notify the DPS or the TDS that this happened. This is how much you're claiming, or you're not making any claim, and you issue out the deposit to the tenant. Contract outlines a lot of different things. The more it's got, the better, because it's more watertight. And then we start going deeply into particular situations under which tenant is responsible, or it's us being responsible for specific situations. It specifies things like, for example, who's responsible for paying the TV license. You see, it specifies things like what happens if they leave for like longer than 2 weeks, that they need to notify us. So there's a lot of things happening in that contract, and it's crucial and important that the tenant not only signs that, but they really do understand what are the terms and conditions under the AST contract. So on top of that, we will also specify some parts about the damages, about the maintenance, about the responsibilities of the tenant. We also say what is it that they must do during the tenancy, and also things that they cannot do, they mustn't do during their tenancy. We also outline what is it that we agree to do during the actual tenancy. So, for example, keeping the place safe, or providing all the legal paperwork like EPCs, EICRs, and other documentation that is essential for us to provide to them so they know they live in a safe environment. A good AST contract also outlines the details under which we have to be notified about any important changes. So, for example, if the tenant decides to move out, where do they need to send a notice? And we just specify the postal address, or we specify the email address. This is where they can officially notify us about all the changes happening during their tenancy. We also find there is a section about when we can actually repossess the property, and typically it falls if they misbehave a lot or they don't pay rent on time. And of course, there are different procedures that we can enforce in order to obtain the possession of the property back. Obviously, at the end, we've got section about signatures and dates, which is typical to the contract. And finally, the last page has got some details if we apply a guarantor to the agreement. I didn't mention the word guarantor. I didn't want to confuse you too much, but guarantor is a very important element of your rent to HMO business. You see, not every tenant or prospective tenant will have the clear situation under which you can just freely let them into the property, because there will be some people who have some circumstances or their situation is not as safe, and for this reason you want to protect yourself in case this tenant stopped paying rent. You see, if we sign a contract and there is a guarantor, there is a second person in the agreement that we can go to and say, look, the tenant that you co-signed the contract with does not pay rent, and you're next legally responsible person for this rent, and for this reason you have to cover this rent. So a guarantor technically could be a family member, or it could be a friend, or it could be even a neighbor. Does not really matter what's the relation between the tenant and the guarantor. But what we want to make sure is, if the tenant hasn't got the right affordability for the property, for example, they could be a student, maybe they don't have a lot of money, we can then ask for a guarantor, and guarantor will co-sign the AST contract, confirming that if this particular tenant does not pay rent, then we can go to the guarantor and say, the tenant didn't pay rent on time, now you're responsible for paying that rent as well. We can legally take the two of them to the court if they both fail to pay the rent on time. So as you can see, one final page is for the guarantor if applicable, and if there is a guarantor, then make sure you will also conduct your referencing on the guarantor. One difference is that the guarantor should typically have affordability of 36 months instead of 30 months when it comes to calculating the monthly rent times 36. Okay, that's the part. So the affordability of the guarantor typically should be a bit more than the actual tenant. If they pass the affordability test, you've done all the checks right, let them sign the contract as well, and then you're protected in two ways rather than one way. I know that a lot of landlords these days ask for a guarantor all the time because they understand that eviction process in the UK is not the best. It takes time, and people just want to make sure that they don't have to go through the eviction process, and for that reason they always ask for a guarantor. I personally don't do it if I know that somebody's situation is clear, that they've got enough affordability. I see that they're okay to pay the rent on time. Obviously, we do all the referencing in order to make sure that the right fit for us and for our business. However, if I sense that there is a little bit of uncertainty about this person, then I always ask for a guarantor, because this way I'm protecting me, myself, and I.
So now we're finally heading towards the end of this video, towards the end of the HMO course and program. And as you can see, there's quite a lot to take on. But that does not mean that you cannot do it. Follow the process step by step, exactly like we outlined. And then on top of that, make sure that you apply certain principles to your business. First of all, I want you to accept the fact that rent to HMO is a business. Rent to rent in general is a business, and you have to treat it as a business from day one. If you neglect this point, then you will start doing it for fun or maybe just as additional source of income, and you will never expand it, or you will always be below your profit targets, and this will not be a profitable business. Accept the fact that this is a business, and every single month do your monthly statements, financial statements that will allow you to help and analyze what happened in the previous month, what happened in the previous 6 months, what happened in the previous 12 months, and then see where is the money leaking? Where is the money coming from? Are you positive in your revenue? Are you negative in your revenue? Continuous analysis of your finances and number analysis will help you to not only understand what's happening in your business, but also how to expand it moving forward, and also eliminate things that are not running well in your business. Now, you might be wondering how to expand from what we've already covered. Well, you already know how to find deals. You already know how to manage them, how to find tenants, how to monetize on tenants. So you just have to do more of it. That's as simple as it is. Once you've got one property and that property is fully occupied, it naturally will take less time for you to operate this property, to run this property. Because once you've got HMO fully occupied, the next thing that's going to happen for you is just to look after it. So you will probably just get an odd message from tenants. Maybe you will just have to go and do your safety checks, for example. But naturally speaking, it will take much less time from your end. The new time that you acquire or you get back, you now have to utilize to go back, find more lucrative properties, do more viewings, submit more offers, and get more deals. And as simple as it sounds, just scale up your portfolio. Don't just think that one or two properties is enough, because it certainly isn't. If you have this business mindset, business people always think how to expand and how to grow. And certainly you have to apply the same thinking behind your business, because otherwise you might get to a point where you get very comfortable with one or two properties because that's what you wanted. But all of a sudden, if one landlord comes back to you and decides to claim his property back from you, then all of a sudden you're losing 100% or 50% of your revenue in your business, and that can be devastating to your business. When you have time, when you have the momentum going forward for you, then expand that business and go beyond your expectations, because now all of a sudden you know how to do it. You've proven this once, you've proven it twice. Why not to expand even further and protect your business even more? I hope this video was very, very helpful to you, that you found it valuable. And it's not going to be just one of those things that you took maybe some notes, or you maybe just listened and you'll just forget about it. I don't want you to do that. In all fairness, if you got this far in this video and it's already a 2-second video of the whole series, then it means that you're very much into rent to rent and you want to see financial rewards from rent to rent business. And for this reason, I invite you, if you haven't done it yet, I invite you to join my 30-day challenge, because this is getting really advanced now. You've got all the knowledge and that's great, but now it's all about implementing this knowledge, making sure that you've got the right blueprint in your business, and you've got the right network and the right support, and you've got the right coach as well. And I would be honored to have you joining the challenge, joining our weekly mastermind sessions, and really just scaling up your business to the next level. If you think whether that's for you or not, this is probably one of the cheapest things that you can find online, because I'm not going to charge you thousands of pounds, just like a lot of different gurus charge you thousands of pounds. They give you some course or some training material and they leave you stranded, because they don't give a toss about you. They just want to see your money in their bank accounts. This is completely different. I'm providing all this value to you so you can see how to do it, so you can start implementing if you want to. But if you really want to get your 8 pre-qualified viewings in a single month in the next 30 days, this challenge is done for you. And on top of that, you'll know exactly how to stack HMO deals, rent-to-rent deals. I'll build a blueprint for you, and then you'll get your scripts and your time managing tool as well. The value is absolutely incredible. And on top of that, I'm going to be seeing you every single week for the next 4 weeks. So you'll see at the end of it, you'll be a completely different person by implementing certain steps that you haven't even thought about before. So with this in mind, go down below in the description, you'll find a link to join my 30-day challenge. And if you're interested in rent to service accommodation strategy, then I invite you to keep watching. Watch video number 3, which will be dedicated specifically to service accommodation strategy within rent to rent world. I cannot wait to see you there. And if you haven't clicked the 30-day challenge yet, I invite you to do so right now. And after this, go and watch video 3.